Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this special meeting of Perth and Kinross Council to pay tribute to our late Queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. I would ask everybody to keep their microphones on mute during the meeting unless they are speaking, and I'm more than happy for members to use the lectern if they wish for their contributions. For the proceeding today, can I remind councillors and officers in the chambers at home to use the chat box to attract my attention. I'm unable to have a visual of everyone attending the meeting on my screen at the one time, and this is the only way we can ensure that everyone has their say. Do we have any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I have no apologies submitted, and unless there are any apologies to come from the floor or online. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, apologies on behalf of Councillor Reid and Councillor Freshwater, who are abroad at the moment. And Councillor Ahern is going to try and join the meeting, but if he is not successful, could you please record his apologies as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I find it unlikely, but do we have any declarations of interest? We are required formally to ask that. No, thank you very much. And Scott Hendry will now just check the attendance of those online.
Thank you. Probably the simplest thing to do is just to run through and check who's online and who's in the chambers. So, Bailey Ahern, are you online?
I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Present.
Councillor Anderson. Bailey. I can see you're present. Councillor Liz Barrett, present. Councillor Peter Barrett is present. Councillor Braun is present. Bailey Brock.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Carr is present. Councillor Chan, I believe, maybe online.
Present.
Councillor Cuthbert, I think, is online.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, I know, is present here. Councillor Drysdale is in the chambers. We have Councillor Duff. We have Councillor Forbes. Councillor Frampton. Yes. Councillor Harvey. Yep. Councillor Illingworth is here. Councillor James is here. Councillor Kogali is here. Councillor Lang is here. Councillor Leishman is here. Councillor McPherson is present. Councillor Massey is present. Councillor McCall.
Present. Present.
Thank you. Provost, are you online?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen, we have with us. Bailey McLaren, we have with us. We have yourself, Deputy Provost. Councillor Rebeck is here. Councillor Robertson.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Shires is with us. Councillor Smith is here. Councillor Colin Stewart. We have Councillor Grant Stewart is here. We have Councillor Waters. Councillor Welsh is here, and Bailey Williamson is present. So that's all members present, Deputy Provost, apart from Councillor Reid and Councillor Freshwater.
Thank you very much. Before we start with the formal business of this meeting, can I ask all those who are able to stand for a moment's silence for the late Queen? Thank you all. I now call on the Provost Sander McDade to make his contribution to today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm joining today's meeting along with other representatives of Civic Scotland, including our own Lord Lieutenant Stephen Leckie and Sheriff Principal here in Edinburgh as we prepare to mark Her Majesty's life at a service of reflection and thanksgiving at St Giles Cathedral. This is perhaps very appropriate for me, as this is where, as a young child, I first saw the Queen and the late Queen Mother arrive to induct new members into the most ancient, most noble Order of the Thistle. I can still remember the excitement of getting to see the Queen and the electric atmosphere when she stepped out of the car. It therefore makes returning here all the more poignant to me today. Over the past few days, I've spoken to huge numbers of people across Perth and Kinross who've expressed what the Queen meant to them, many with beautiful stories of formal meetings or indeed chance encounters. The recurring theme of these memories is of a sovereign who always puts her duty to her people and country first. I can recall meeting the Queen during her visit to Perth in 2012, after she had granted Perth city status. Even at the age of 18, the same excitement I had felt as a much younger child existed. Again, great crowds had gathered, and what this time seemed to me a much smaller figure in stature, but could hold the entire room with a look. She managed to show knowledge and understanding on whatever the subject was under discussion, which is perhaps unsurprising after meeting many of the greatest minds and figures of the past 60 years at that point. The Queen shared one other love that I share, which is for the Cairngorms, and specifically East Cairngorms and Royal Deeside. And I've been fortunate to see the interest Her Majesty took in this area, and now His Majesty the King takes in this area of Scotland. And it was here that she felt able to escape the media and the scrutiny, and was warmly welcomed by the local community to exercise her love of horses, dogs, and the outdoors more generally. It was a huge honour that my first official duties as the civic head of Perth and Kinross were to join our communities across Perth and Kinross come together to celebrate Her Majesty's unrivalled Platinum Jubilee, something we are unlikely to potentially see again. And it is important to just mark the incredible service and devotion to our country Her Majesty served to the absolute end. And I would like to thank all members who have paid tribute to Her Majesty by joining us yesterday for the cortege passing, who have signed the books of condolence, and who came to mark the proclamation of King Charles III. And I want to end by saying, God save the King, and that as a community, we will mourn Her Majesty's loss, but we will also celebrate the fantastic service that she gave us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost. I'll now in turn call on the council leader and group leaders to make their contributions, and if whilst those are taking place, if other members can place their requests to speak in the chat, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. I now call on Councillor Grant Lang.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I shall be brief, and because many others over the weekend and in the coming days will speak much better than I can about the Queen. I feel that any death is extremely sad. Every passing touches family and friends of the deceased. Passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was obviously extremely sad, but has touched millions of people. The fact that so many people felt they knew her and looked on her as a constant within an ever-changing world is a testament to the way that she carried out her duties with utmost dedication, a degree of grit, and even a splash of humour. She will be sadly missed by many, many people.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lang. Can I now call on Councillor John Duff?
Deputy Provost, Chief Executive, elected members and officers. Over the last few days, we have witnessed the widespread profound sadness which greeted news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, our much-loved monarch. Throughout the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and indeed the world, the strength of feelings surrounding her passing has been unprecedented. Feelings not just of sorrow and grief, but also of gratitude and of thanksgiving. Gratitude and thanksgiving for a life dedicated to duty and to serving her people. Queen Elizabeth was a truly remarkable and dignified lady whose steadfast presence saw us through times of celebration and joy and through times of sadness and loss. Not destined to be our sovereign until abdication altered the line of succession, when it became her time, she nonetheless committed her whole life, whether it be long or short, to the unswerving service of her people, touching many of our hearts with her warmth and kindness during the 70 glorious years of her reign. As well as a devoted public servant, the Queen was a woman of deep faith, which was the foundation for her life and actions, a highly respected leader, and a well-loved, wise and much admired sovereign. And for all these gifts, we are eternally grateful. As we have seen from both the James Bond sequence from the Olympic Games and the Paddington Bear episode from our Platinum Jubilee celebrations, the Queen harboured a great sense of humour. I recall a story told to me by a Church of Scotland minister who had been asked to lead worship one Sunday in Crathy Kirk. If you are to preach to the royal family, you are invited to join them for dinner on the Saturday evening and stay over at Balmoral. This was the first time preaching in Crathy, and understandably he arrived at Balmoral a little nervous. He recounted at length being greeted by an equerry and walked through the corridors of Balmoral, where a lady in waiting knocked on the door, and a familiar, very familiar, polite female voice said, "Come in." The door was opened, and there in front of the minister was the Queen. He walked over and shook her hand, at which point the Queen asked him if he had just driven up from Ayr that afternoon. When he confirmed that he had, Her Majesty replied, "You don't happen to know what won the Ayr Gold Cup this afternoon, do you?" Not only did the Queen have an immense love of horse racing, she had a deep and abiding affection for Scotland, and especially for Balmoral. While the loss of her Queen will be felt deeply by all of us, I am sure the royal family will take some comfort from the fact that she passed away at Balmoral, a place very dear to her heart, and where she felt completely at home and at peace. Deputy Provost, our thoughts and prayers go out to our new sovereign, King Charles, and the royal family in this moment of national grief and mourning. Thank you for the opportunity to pay tribute to our late Queen. God save the King.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duff. I now call on Councillor Peter Barrett.
Provost, Deputy Provost, I'm grateful to you for calling this special meeting of Perth and Kinross Council so that we can pay tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and express our condolences and sympathies to the royal family. Thousands of people lined the route of the funeral cortege as it made its way from Balmoral to Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh, with Her Majesty's coffin covered by the Royal Standard of Scotland yesterday. Those crowds who gathered in mourning to honour our longest reigning monarch expressed more tangibly than words the solemn respect and love in which she was held by our nation. For generations, the Queen has been the embodiment of sovereignty, the head of the royal family, the face of the nation, and our greatest ambassador. When I was a child, the pre-decimal coins in your pocket could contain a wide variety of monarchs: King George V and VI, Edward VI, Queen Victoria, And you could lay out the order of succession from the penny change in your pocket arriving at Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. But since decimalisation over 50 years ago, the face on the front of our coinage has only ever been of Queen Elizabeth II, a constant reminder, growing older, of the greatest life of public service in the history of our country. On her 21st birthday as heir to the throne, Princess Elizabeth declared to the British Commonwealth that her whole life, whether it be long or short, would be devoted to its service. By any and every measure, that promise has been fulfilled. As we give thanks for a life so well and selflessly lived, my thoughts and those of my Scottish Liberal Democrat group colleagues are with the Queen's family and friends. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peter Barrett. Councillor Colin Stewart, can you now speak?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I had, the Provost, I think, has said everything from the independent group that we would like to convey. I had myself only one occasion on which I was privileged to meet Her Majesty. It was the reopening of the pavilion in Baxter Park in Dundee some years ago. There were a whole array of stallholders and community groups laid out around the outside of the park, suffering in the torrential rain that afternoon. We knew that Her Majesty and the late Duke of Edinburgh were meant to be arriving, and they did. And at that very moment, the clouds parted and bright sunshine filled the park. When she left, the clouds rolled in again, and the torrential rain started again. The sun was certainly shining on her and all of us that afternoon. But it was a different moment when she was making her way around the community group stalls that touched me. Many people over these days will be speaking of her sense of duty and her sense of service. The Duke of Edinburgh and Her Majesty were making their way around one stall at a time, leapfrogging, if you will. The Duke of Edinburgh had taken longer than he should have at the stall before me, and Her Majesty was trying to get past, and I saw only a small, perfectly coiffed, behatted head peeking round the shoulder of the Duke, an impish smile on her face. And I think what that says for me is also her sense of humility and selflessness and self-deprecation. And I think that these are qualities which are very important to all of us in public life, and she should be remembered for those also.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stewart. And I now call on Bailey Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to say our goodbyes to the late Queen Elizabeth II as she passed us on her way to Balmoral. People from across the country came in their tens of thousands to line the streets and pay their respects to our country's greatest monarch. It gave us all time to reflect on who she was as Queen and how she served us for over 70 years. And the overall thought I keep coming back to is her devoted service. For over 70 years, she put her country, and most importantly its people, before all else, including herself. There is a valuable lesson there for all of us. We who stand up to serve our community should aspire to always put those people above ourselves and follow her lead. Her hard work for this country inspired devotion and huge respect from people here and abroad. The ties she made with other countries highlights the importance of looking beyond our borders and is a lesson in working with and embracing other cultures. Many have said the Queen was a constant in this country, and that is true, but she didn't shy away from change when it came. As we move into a new era now, with King Charles III at the helm, Let us move forward with a hope for the future and remember the lessons of service and devotion from the past. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Bailey. And if members would now permit me, I'd like to say a few words myself. Growing up as I did in the home counties of England, the institutions of monarchy were close to hand and familiar, and I suppose I just took them for granted as the way things were. It was only the experience of life that brought a realization to me of the respect there was around the world, within the Commonwealth and beyond, for our late Queen as her reign progressed. In 1981 in New Zealand, on the other side of the globe, I was astonished by the regard there was for the Queen, and somewhat amused by the "if you are from the southeast of England, you must see her quite often" sort of comment. I have never actually met the Queen. During my career, perhaps most notably at the British Army Staff College and on an exercise once at the Swedish National Defence College, I was very struck by the regard for the Queen and the importance of the Commonwealth expressed by, most notably in my memory, a Malawian, a Nigerian and an Indian officer, all from countries that are republics. Later, in the context of operations in Iraq in 2003 and after, I had sight of a humorous but seriously intentioned briefing note prepared by an American Army staff officer for getting on well with the Brits. One of the points it made for American soldiers was that if they took their high regard for their president as a starting point, for the Brits, any prime minister was invariably several points on the scale below that, but the Queen was a very large number of points on the scale above that, and they should always remember it. And as we have found in recent days, our late Queen was held in high regard around the whole world. Just one example that's close to me. In Lithuania, the Three Crosses Monument in Vilnius is perhaps the most sacred memorial they have to defiance of and opposition to previous Russian and Soviet occupiers of the country. In recent days, to show respect to our late Queen, this monument has been bathed at night in purple and silver light, an honour that has, to my knowledge, never been accorded to any other person. And finally, I have been honoured and privileged during my life to be a holder of the Queen's Commission as an Army officer. This commission brought duty and responsibility, but if ever one needed example in the exercise of those duties and responsibilities, one only had to look at our late Queen's example. It is hard to imagine seeing her like again. God save the Queen. God save the King. Thank you. I now call upon the Baileys in turn. Bailey Ahern.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Deputy Provost, thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon in remembrance of Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. I find it very strange to be sitting here in Tenerife watching what is happening in the UK, and in some respects it feels unreal. I make no apologies in repeating some events made by others, as these are events that made our Queen. At this moment she lies in rest in Edinburgh, having passed away in Balmoral, somewhere she felt at home, and I'm sure that she wanted to spend her final hours here in Scotland, a country and a home that she adored. I remember as a child living in London, being taken often to Buckingham Palace to see the changing of the guard, hoping one day to see the Queen. In 1982, I joined the Royal Air Force, and like several others in this chambers, attested the oath of allegiance to the Queen, her heirs and successors. That oath was very special to me, and my time in Her Majesty's Armed Forces will always stay with me. To the majority of those who served, the Queen was simply known as the boss. I had the honour of being in attendance several times during my service, and I was also honoured when I attended the Royal Garden Party at Holyrood House along with my wife in July 2013, where the Queen was in attendance. On her 21st birthday in 1947, the Princess at that time gave a declaration and said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it being long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." That was a declaration that I think she fulfilled with her whole life, right up to her last days. One of her last duties was to appoint her 15th Prime Minister when Liz Truss was asked to form. Sorry, it was awful. was asked to form a government, not as before in London, but due to Her Majesty's failing health, did so in Balmoral. Who would have known that so soon afterwards she would pass away? The Queen and her faith was very important to her, and likewise to myself. I'm not in the UK to say a prayer for her in my cathedral, however, this is something I will do on my return. As the Armed Forces and Veterans Champion for Perth and Kinross, a position which I cherish, I think I can speak for all veterans that served the boss that this is an immensely sad time. At the next meeting of the Perth veterans, we will hold a 2-minute silence to remember Her Majesty and the unwavering support that she gave to every person in uniform. God bless the Queen. God save the King. And I take a total rum in her health. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Baillie Ahern. I now call upon Baillie Brock.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Many words have already been said, so I won't repeat them. However, I would like to say thank you. Thank you to a remarkable woman, our Queen Elizabeth, who served 70 years of service and devotion to our country. We will never see the likes of this ever again. Rest in peace, ma'am. God save the King.
Thank you very much, Baillie Brock. I now call on Baillie McLaren.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Like many, I am deeply saddened by the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. In her passing, we have lost one of the greatest leaders. She selflessly devoted her life to her role, a role she carried out with immense humanity, compassion and pride, always with a friendly smile. She worked tirelessly for the good of the nation. Over the 70 years of her reign, she witnessed great advancement and modernisation, which she took in her stride and embraced. An animal lover, she enjoyed horse riding, breed award-winning Highland ponies she bred, and cup-winning racehorses. She is regarded as one of the finest ambassadors of the horse racing world. Her herds of award-winning Highland and Aberdeen Angus cattle were also award-winning. She was a highly respected member of the farming and rural communities. Her racing pigeons were also trophy winners of note. Her love of animals was a mark of her personality. A corgi never far from her heel. A committed countryside conservationist. She gave dedicated support to a great number of charities and organisations she was patron of throughout her life. She was a lady of beauty and style, always appropriately attired and accessorised, making a striking presence. Her constant presence in our lives was a comfort and indeed inspiration to many, and will be greatly mourned. In her passing, she has left an everlasting legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Baillie McLaren. I now call on Baillie Williamson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you for giving me the opportunities to speak. My auntie's 93 years of age next month, and I was discussing with her how many monarchs have reigned since she was born in 1929. She proudly informed me that King Charles III would be the 5th monarch and impressively proceeded to name the preceding monarchs. I raise this to point out the level of stability that the Queen Elizabeth has given to this country over the last 70 years, following the turbulence of the 1930s, 40s and 50s. She made a huge sacrifice in the service of our countries and the Commonwealth. We had all come to accept that she would reign forever, and this is why there is a deeper sense of shock shared at the loss of our Queen. This is the end of an era, and I feel that our countries will be somewhat the poorer at her passing. Thank you for everything, Mum. Thank you.
Thank you, Baillie Williamson. We now move on to other councillors, and I would call first on Councillor Drysdale.
Deputy Provost and colleagues, 30 years ago in 1992, I was privileged and honoured to meet and, importantly for me, have lunch with Her Majesty the Queen when she officially opened the new Royal Bank of Scotland building in Edinburgh at Drummond House. I very much appreciate that during her reign she met 15 UK Prime Ministers, 14 US Presidents, 7 Popes and 5 First Ministers of Scotland, together with hundreds of thousands of citizens of the world during 99 state visits and countless trips throughout the Commonwealth and the United Kingdom. So I'm absolutely certain she wouldn't remember me, but I remember vividly every moment and every word I exchanged with her. And that is the measure of Queen Elizabeth II, because I'm also pretty sure everyone that has seen, met or spoken with her will feel exactly the same as I do about their own experience. She touched so many lives, and we will not see her likes again. Those of us old enough will clearly remember where we were and how we learned of the assassination of President Kennedy nearly 59 years ago. Man setting foot on the moon over 53 years ago. The atrocities of Dunblane 26 years ago, and 9/11 21 years ago yesterday. Last Thursday evening, when the BBC interrupted its programmes and Hugh Edwards somberly announced the passing of the Queen, is another such occasion when we will all remember how we heard the official news. And we will remember for the rest of our lives, because this is truly the end of an era. The history of these islands that we were all taught in school was presented as revolving around the reigns of kings and queens, how they acted and what they achieved. Of course, that is a mere fraction of the true story of people's lives through the ages. But as the longest serving monarch in British history, during decades of incredible change, the Queen was certainly the continuity through all of our lives until this point in time. Today, as we remember her dedicated service to the 4 nations and the Commonwealth, Her Majesty thoroughly deserves all of the tributes from around the world, to which I humbly add my own. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. I now call on Councillor Gogali.
I'd first just like to concede that I'm probably not going to do this justice, and most people probably can't, but I'm going to give it a shot nevertheless. The Queen was not a woman that I ever met nor ever had the privilege of even being near, but her impact every day was felt in all of our lives, regardless of whether we actively knew it or not. Every pound spent, every historical moment, every fundamental tenet of Britishness, she was designed and subjected to being the avatar for it all. She was British, she was Britishness, and she was Britain. Every high, every low, every stereotype was fundamentally manifest in a girl that was never even meant to be queen. An allegory like no other for a country characterized by a stiff upper lip and a sharp sense of humor. A sense of duty and an international role far more magnificent and significant than it was ever supposed to be. Her impact was undeniably guided by God. Her faith a fundamental reminder of what it means to be a Christian. Quiet duty undertaken with a commitment and steadfastness that many aspire to, but few are actually capable of. Now, although I have no stories of ever meeting Her Majesty, or any Major Rawls for that matter, I do remember a few years ago the unity that was felt in Crieff when the new Prince of Wales and the Earl of Strathern came to Crieff, stood in McCrossley Park and bottled whiskey with locals. The sense of joy from everybody, from small children who will probably never even remember that day, to the people who's, will constantly be telling stories about the time that they piped for the Queen, to people who had watched her grow up throughout the last century. She had a real impact. Now, I think nothing actually says better for me her impact on an international stage, as when I used to live in Shanghai, and there was one day I'd come off a flight. I was kind of dazed, very, very long trips, and went to a shopping centre, and all I could hear was "God save the Queen, Jerusalem. God save the Queen, Jerusalem," just in the back of my mind. And I'd barely slept for essentially 24 hours, and I thought I was going insane. But we went up the top floor to look for some food, and we came off the escalator, and just in front of us there was what looked like what an American might describe a British pub as, surrounded by pictures of the Queen and Union Jacks. They were the only things in there, full of Chinese families only eating roast dinner. And again, this may have just been some fever dream that was conjured up by the lack of sleep. But I think what it really was a genuine demonstration of the impact that a woman had worldwide, even on a country that would have rejected that institution with such force. I didn't think I'd ever be in here quoting Macron, but when he said last week that whilst she may have been our Queen, she was the Queen to the rest of the world, he got it exactly right. She will remain the Queen throughout history and hopefully go down as Elizabeth the Great. So rest in peace to Her Majesty, and God save the King.
Thank you, Councillor Kugali. I now call on Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Kings and Queens through the ages. There have been many. There has, however, only been one constant through my life. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II will be remembered as a wonderful, gracious, caring and humble head of state. Indeed, she was regarded as such worldwide. From a very young age, Mum used to drag us out to see and to wave to the Queen whenever she was in town. And we always used to feel crestfallen because she didn't have a crown on. The car would go by and she would wave, but there was no crown, no tiara. I had the absolute pleasure of playing in front of her many, many years ago when I played drums in the Royal British Legion Pipe Band. It was a very brief moment, and I have to say it was extremely brief. In a line procession, when she walked by me and she smiled, and then she moved on. I was a teenager at the time, and although she was somewhat older than I was, and I do hope that's not inappropriate, I thought that she was a beautiful woman with a radiant and glowing smile. No tiara though. She was always revered within the Allen household and will continue to be so. She was my Queen. God rest her soul, and God save the King. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I now call on Councillor Braun.
Thank you, David Provost, and thank you, officers, for arranging this meeting so quickly. I know that most of us in this chamber, including myself, have only ever known Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth as sovereign. Her reign of 70 years, the longest ever recorded, encompassed immense change in this country. In 1952, as she ascended the throne, this country was still suffering the scars of war, rationing was still in play, and it was entering the sunset as an imperial power. Today, we are a modern, multiracial, multicultural society where empire has evolved into Commonwealth. We live in the digital age where communication is in the blink of an eye. Our meeting today makes use of this technology and can be seen live and across the internet. But amidst this, we are witness to traditions not seen for 70 years that date back across the centuries. We'll see even more in due course, some even dating back to William the Conqueror. The very core of our history is coming alive before us. The outpouring of emotion that we are seeing in such a public way is almost unheard of. I can only recall such scenes twice before, as a boy over half a century ago, following the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, and 2 years later, after the death of Sir Winston Churchill. For the Queen, the 70 years, to quote Charles Dickens, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. A family of her own, leading to grandchildren and recently great-grandchildren. She'd invited 15 prime ministers to form her governments, from Sir Winston Churchill to most recently Liz Truss, and has seen the coming of what I thought was 13 presidents of the United States, but we're not going to argue over just one. As head of the armed services, she has seen servicemen and women in conflicts across the world and felt the loss of those that did not come back. The Malayan emergency, Aden, the Falklands, and the troubles in Northern Ireland. And in the latter, when peace beckoned, she showed no reticence in shaking hands with former terrorist Martin McGuinness with the dignity we would expect. And when terrible, unexpected tragedy struck, it was her presence that helped bind open wounds at places now marked indelibly in the national consciousness, at Lockerbie, Dunblane, Aberfan. We can recall the Jubilees, from the Silver Jubilee in 1977 to the Platinum Jubilee just a few months ago. In 1969, she became a star of television with the Royal Family documentary, which showed us that, although royal, this was still an ordinary family with the usual family fun and arguments. And as we've heard, her sense of fun continued when she became a Bond girl in 2012 and took second billing to Paddington Bear just this year. But what endeared her to so many for so long was her sense of duty, of service, of dignity, which may now seem dated and from another age, but should be seen as an example to all of us. A promise to serve kept throughout her reign, duty before self, and we saw that just 2 days before her passing, when she invited new Prime Minister Liz Truss to form a government. But all good things must end, and drawing again on Charles Dickens, it is a far, far better rest that she goes to than she has ever known. She has crossed the river to another shore, to another realm. And as you enter the eternal pages of history, we thank you for your service, ma'am. An era has passed, and as seamlessly as the crown passes to a new king, a new era begins. The burden of monarchy now rests on other shoulders. Our new king, of course, enjoyed the longest apprenticeship in history, but now that advisor who stood behind him has gone. He must now face the difficult and daunting task of sovereign alone. And as fate has done in the past, it has left him in uncertain times. A new, untried and untested Prime Minister, a cost of living crisis with rising inflation, people worried about paying the bills, a war raging in East Europe, a world unsure of what the future holds. For now, we can only offer our condolences to a family in mourning. But as the weeks pass, we can help our new king by showing him the affection and loyalty shown to his mother. God save the king.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I now call on Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. And before I begin, Deputy Provost, can I offer the thanks of the Conservative Group, and I hope the entire Council, to all of the Council staff who yesterday played the role in making the events run with the professionalism as we expect from all of our staff. Last night I sent a short message to Barbara Renton thanking her for that, but Deputy Provost, with your permission, I would ask that that be recorded on today's minute. I've had the opportunity to meet the Queen on a few occasions, most of them through my job as a photographer, stuck in with a bunch of other photographers, following her every move like a pack of hungry wolves, hardly what you would call meeting the Queen. That point will become relevant in a short while, Deputy Provost. The only time I really met the Queen was as a small child, I think about 6 years old, and as some of you may know, I grew up and lived in Camperdown Park in Dundee. I lived there because this was a tied house that came with my mother's job. The Queen was coming to plant a tree. I can't remember what the occasion was, but I was chosen to hand her the spade with which she would plant the tree, take the spade back from her and hold on to it. As you can imagine, I was very nervous. Two things from that day stick in my mind. The first was I was forced to wear short trousers on a very cold day. It was absolutely freezing. I was very uncomfortable. But the much more serious one was that it was explained to me in great detail. She would put 3 spadefuls of soil into the tree. She'd hand the shovel back to me to hold on to. However, when it came to the event, she only put 2 spadefuls of soil into the hole and then handed me back the shovel. I was absolutely horrified. This was not the plan. What do I do? And for a brief moment, I considered handing her back the spade and telling her. Thankfully, back in those days at least, my brain worked before my voice and I kept quiet. But I do wonder if she might have found it funny had I handed her the spade back and told her she'd got it wrong. And Deputy Provost, that spade hangs in my shed, battered, well used, like all of the others. So going back to press photography, I've had the honour to meet Prince Philip at Holyrood in a garden party in 1986. It was to celebrate young people who'd obtained the Duke of Edinburgh's Gold Award. We were there, standing around in groups, young people from Dundee all together, and eventually came over to chat to us. And he chatted to a few people, and I think he was going to ignore me. Then he looked at me and he said, "So what are you going to do now that you've left school?" And I said, "I'm going to study photography. I want to be a photographer." He paused and he looked at me and he said, "Not one of those bloody press photographers, I hope." And I've often thought about that day on the occasion I've had the opportunity to follow him and other members of the royal family around. And I wonder if you ever remembered that brief conversation with an 18-year-old from Dundee at a garden party in Holyrood. I didn't take any pictures yesterday. It seemed inappropriate. But one of the best stories I've heard about the Queen was when she was walking in Balmoral with nothing but her dogs and her protection officer, and she bumped into some American tourists and they got chatting to her. They had no idea who she was. So they said to her, "Have you ever met the Queen?" And she said, "No, I haven't, but he has," pointing to the protection officer. That makes me laugh even to this day. To finish, Deputy Provost, let's not lose sight of the fact that other people, some close to us, have suffered loss this week. I'm certain the Queen would want us to think of them at this point too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. I now call on Councillor McKeown.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Provost. When I was thinking about writing this speech, I thought, what did the monarchy, what did the Queen mean to me? And I felt that, the history of our nation is tied in the royal family. From the Canmore Kings to the Stone of Destiny at Scone, Robert the Bruce, Mary Queen of Scots, the Stuarts who united the crowns, Queen Victoria and Albert who purchased Balmoral and changed that small, beautiful part of Highland Scotland forever. And then Queen Elizabeth II was bound to Scotland by these ties of ancestry, affection and duty. She is descended from the royal house of Stuart on both sides of her family, and appears now that she chose Balmoral for her final days. On the 1st of July 1999, she reconvened the Scottish Parliament with its full lawmaking powers and a mace which was inscribed with wisdom, justice, compassion and integrity, setting the aspirations for a modern Scotland. I have never personally met any member of the royal family, and yesterday's cortege through Dundee was probably the closest physically I've ever been to the Queen. But I did find it very humbling and was grateful to her when she awarded the NHS of all 4 nations of this country the George Cross during the COVID pandemic. She said about the NHS, "Over more than 7 decades, and especially in recent times, you have supported the people of our country with courage, compassion and dedication, demonstrating the highest standards of public service. You have endured thanks, heartfelt appreciation." She was a constant in all our lives, and my thoughts are with her family at this sad time.
Thank you, Councillor McKeown. I now call on Councillor Donaldson.
Deputy Provost, fellow councillors, as Baillie Brock has said, many words have been said about the Queen, words and sentiments with which so many of us here will concur. Words like constancy and continuity. Continuity in the manner in which she followed on from the example set by her father, George VI. But it was a continuity that also over 70 years embraced immense change. Constancy. For all of us here, she was, of course, a permanent fixture in our lives. My reminiscences are not nearly as good as some others, such as Councillor Forbes here. But I can recall as a very young lad in the early 60s, being taken by my granny down from my grandparents' farm to the banks of the Tay to see the Royal Train passing through over the Cargill Viaduct on its way up to Aberdeen. And then she went on with her family to Balmoral. And yesterday, the Queen made her last journey back through Scotland from Balmoral. There are many other words that have been used about the Queen, not least her devotion to public service, not least with what regard she was held in by global leaders and heads of state. But there is one other word I believe should apply, that of peacemaker. As was stated earlier, the Queen had a deep and abiding religious faith, and that was reflected in her actions. I rarely quote the Bible, but in Matthew 5:9, it states in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And a peacemaker is not just someone in biblical terms who reconciles people with God, but with one another. And I think that is reflected very much in three areas, three good examples. First of all, her visit to the Irish Republic in 2011, to Cork and to Dublin, to build and what built a lasting rapport. Then again in 2012 to Belfast. These were major acts of reconciliation, acts that built upon and strengthened the peace process in Northern Ireland. Then again, as a peacemaker in the Commonwealth, and not least in South Africa, and Councillor Barrett referred to the statement she made in 1947 in South Africa. And then a year later, the apartheid regime took over. And took over that beloved country. I think she played a major, and if you read many accounts, such as those of the quite remarkable Helen Suzman, she played a major part in bringing the apartheid regime and era to an end and afterwards. I think that was reflected in the respect and admiration she was held by Nelson Mandela, and she for him. And finally, there is the Commonwealth as a whole. Many of it thought of it as a body that had outlived its usefulness. The answer to that is in the role she played in this really quite unique multinational and multicultural organisation. And in the fact that over recent years, the Commonwealth has been joined by new nations. Nations such as Gabon and Togo, Rwanda and Mozambique, nations which were never part of the old British Empire. To conclude, Deputy Provost, there is a saying that goes, plus ça change, mais plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. All of us here, I'm sure, wish King Charles III all success. But I have to say, with the Queen's passing, I don't think things will stay the same. With her death, it is the end of an era, of an epoch, and indeed, it may be a truism, but we will not see her like again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. I now call on Councillor Smith.
There we go. That's it now. I actually didn't meet the Queen, but in many occasions she came up to my hometown of Lossiemouth, coming off the Royal Yacht Britannia, visiting Royal Naval Air Station at Lossiemouth, and visiting her son, the new King. We used to wave, we used to do all sorts of things, get all excited, and she's always been there as part of my life since I've been born. I remember us in the Boys Brigade. She was up the day before, and I didn't know all this protocol, etc. And I remember being at the BB's prize giving, and we were getting presented our prizes, and at the end somebody said the Queen, and every one of us stood round thinking, the Queen's here, why is she given the prize? Not realising it was part of the national anthem. She has a real human side, because in 1994 I was appointed as a professional at Barrett Golf Club, and I made the unofficial, and I say unofficial, a royal golfer. Now, it was a worrying time, thinking that someone would come down, but unfortunately no one did. But what I did get to know by the locals up there was that they were absolutely adored and loved. Now, I got to know the workers in Balmoral. I got to know one guy, particularly the plumber, Norrie. And he came in one day and he said, what a heck of a day I've had today. And I said, what's happened, Norrie? He says, well, the King and Queen, and I better not say their names, are coming to visit. And the Queen and the Duke are kind of worried that the bed's not going to support them. So he says, here's me, the Queen underneath checking the springs, and Prince Philip jumping up and down in the bed just to make sure everything was working. We then proceeded to go into the lift, jumping up and down again, just to make sure it was working, and thankfully everything was working fine. Norrie's son one day was out in the car driving, and as a young lad did, because they all have their houses in the estate, and he's driving at 2 or 3 miles over the driving speed limit to come round the corner and be confronted with the Queen on her horse with other people there. Norrie, of course, didn't know this, but got a wee letter saying, would you mind the owner of such and such a car slowing down? But Norrie, of course, told his young lad, and the young lad said, but she was on the wrong side of the road. He said, it doesn't matter, she owns all of the roads, so just behave yourself in the future. Now, Royal Deeside itself is unbelievably tied to the royal family. Now, Charles, our new king, is a very good human side as well, I must say. He visited some people in Ballater that were unfortunately ill, and he took no security. He visited himself down to the local garage and his wife and presented her with flowers, and he insisted nobody was to be there. I always used to find it strange that when she arrived for her holidays, the Met Police took over one of the hotels. There was a battalion of soldiers, and when I was there, it was unbelievable to see all these people, especially for the first time. But as the locals used to say to me, could you imagine anyone trying to harm her? Because they would never get past any of the locals, I can assure you. They would have sorted her out. I would say that with her passing, it's like an era for me. She's always been there. I can't believe that she won't be there. But let's just hope, and I'm sure I'm confident of this, that King Charles will do a good job, and I'm looking forward to that. And just as a wee note, to show you how she can be recognised, my father was a salmon fisher down at the mouth of the River Spey, and I always remember he came in one day, and they were out fishing early, and he came back in, and these people came down, and they looked in the boat, and they said to my dad, oh, you've got quite a good catch there, my man. And my dad says, Oh yeah, we've got 2 or 3. And he said, she looked awfully familiar, and so did he. And it wasn't until unfortunately he came back he realised it was the Queen and the Duke. So you see, you can make wee mistakes. But anyway, God bless the Queen, and I'm leaving an image which I think a royalty side is just think of the Queen walking up towards Loch Nagar, walking beside a horse with the Duke of Edinburgh on it and her corgis. And I think it's a great image. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. And I now call on Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, for giving me this opportunity to speak. First and foremost, I think we should all remember that the death of Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland is a time of deep grief and sadness for her family, and I extend my sympathy to King Charles III and the extended royal family. Losing a loved one is difficult enough for each and every one of us without the glare of publicity and public interest around the world. I commend the Queen's children, grandchildren and wider family for their dignity over the past few days, and I've no doubt this will continue until she is laid to rest next Monday, the 19th of September, when she will be in a committal service at St George's Chapel in Windsor, where last year she said farewell to her beloved husband Philip, and with whom she is now reunited in death. The dignity of her family, I think, is a testament to the example Queen Elizabeth herself showed during her life. She leaves a legacy of dignified public service that will now be for her son King Charles and his heirs to maintain and build upon. I wish them all well in the months and years to follow. Being of Irish parentage, for me, some of the most important events during the Queen's long reign was her visits to Ireland in the interest of supporting the Good Friday Agreement and the precious peace process. The significance not only of her presence in Ireland, but of the historic places she visited and her associated words of reconciliation, and the people she met and engaged openly with, both in Ireland and inviting them back again to London, should not be underestimated. So I acknowledge her part in the ongoing peace and reconciliation process in the island of Ireland. Like many in the chamber today, I never met the Queen and only seen her very briefly once in person as her car drove past on the way, perhaps fittingly to a James Bond premiere in Leicester Square in London. But, and I'm sorry I can't remember which one of my colleagues said it this afternoon about a tiara, but I'm fairly sure she was wearing a tiara on that occasion. And if she wasn't, I was certainly left with the impression that she was. May you rest in peace, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. And finally, we have Councillor Anderson, unless any more requests to speak come in quickly. Thank you.
Deputy Provost, fellow councillors, I, amongst some people here present today, I was born in 1947, the year that Her Majesty married Prince Philip. The same year, she also spoke in South Africa and promised her life for service to the nation and the world. And I say, which she fulfilled over and over again, beyond, well above anyone's expectations. Now that she is at rest, I say, I'm pleased that she'll be comfortable now that she's found Philip again after such a short while. But she didn't last long. In the end, she passed away peacefully, which was always a sign that she felt pleased with her life, I hope. My best wishes are to the remaining members of the royal family, that they get through this period and regain strength, and Charles will, the third now, get on with the business that his mother carried out so well. God save the King.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I see no further requests from councillors wishing to speak, and I will now ask the Chief Executive to speak. Thank you.
Deputy Provost, councillors, many thanks for allowing me to speak on behalf of our staff team here at Perth and Kinross Council. Firstly, may I add my voice to the others in the chamber and online today and pay my respects to Her Majesty, and in recognising the huge contribution that she made to public life in our country throughout her whole life, and particularly over the past 70 years as our Head of State. She embodied the very principle of and values that underpin public service, something which I and all of us within the Council's team aspire to as we serve the people of Perth and Kinross every day. If we can bring a fraction of the humility, the commitment, the good grace that she displayed, then I'm sure you will agree we will be doing well. As we mark her passing, my own and I am sure the thoughts of many of our team will turn to her bereaved family, faced with the loss of our monarch, but perhaps more profoundly for them, the loss of their head of family, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and so many more roles that she played within that family. Our thoughts and deepest condolences are with them at this time. Finally, Deputy Provost and councillors, I would wish to take the opportunity to echo the words of Councillor Forbes in thanking our own team who have been involved in supporting arrangements to mark the Queen's passing over the past few days. Our civic team, frontline operational staff who managed her last journey through Perth and Kinross, colleagues in education supporting our children to understand and deal with the loss that they have faced. They have all stepped up without being asked, unselfish, good-humoured, and showing the commitment that underpins our commitment to you as a council and to our communities, ably led by our colleague Barbara Renton. They have provided a fitting tribute to our late Queen, I'm sure you will agree. May she rest in peace.
Thank you, Chief Executive. That brings our formal and sad business today to a close. Can I thank all for their dignity and courtesy in speaking and listening at our proceedings today. We are the first council in Perth and Kinross or in its preceding authorities to have had to hold such a meeting, and it is in a way an honour and a privilege for us to have to hold this meeting today. Can I thank all for their attendance? Thank you.